Fyodor Dostoevsky is one of the greatest writers in the history of literature. Born in 1821 in Russia, he is celebrated for his ability to explore the human mind and the struggles of the human soul. His works often delve into deep moral and philosophical questions, painting a vivid picture of life in 19th-century Russia. Dostoevsky's writing style is known for its intense psychological depth, emotional complexity, and exploration of human suffering. Among his masterpieces, Crime and Punishment stands out as a profound exploration of morality and redemption. First published in 1866, the novel has left a lasting impact on readers worldwide. It tells the story of Rodion Raskolnikov, a young man who commits a murder and grapples with the guilt and consequences of his actions. Crime and Punishment is not merely a story about crime. It is an intense psychological drama that explores questions of right and wrong, justice and mercy, and the burdens of conscience. Dostoevsky examines the societal pressures that drive individuals to desperation and poses timeless questions about the cost of ambition and the nature of redemption. Now let us dive into the story itself and meet its troubled protagonist, Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov is a young man in his early 20s, living in the crowded and poverty-stricken streets of St. Petersburg. Once a brilliant law student, he has abandoned his studies, overcome by despair and a sense of purposelessness. His small, suffocating room mirrors his mental state, dark, cramped, and oppressive. His interactions with the world are minimal, limited to brief encounters with his landlady, his family through letters, and the occasional pawnbroker. Intellectually, Raskolnikov is sharp, but his thoughts are twisted by pride and isolation. He believes himself to be superior to others, yet he is painfully aware of his own failures. His mind is consumed by an idea that grows into an obsession, the theory of the extraordinary man. According to this theory, humanity is divided into two groups. The first consists of ordinary people who follow the rules and laws of society, while the second group, the extraordinary individuals, are those who possess the right to transcend these rules if their actions serve a greater good. Raskolnikov's fascination with this idea is not purely academic. It becomes deeply personal. He begins to wonder if he belongs to this elite group of extraordinary individuals, capable of changing the world through bold, decisive actions. However, to prove this to himself, he feels he must commit an act that defies societal norms, an act that would demonstrate his freedom from conventional morality. This theoretical musing takes on a chilling form when he meets Alyona Ivanovna, a miserly old pawnbroker. Alyona's business thrives on exploiting the desperation of others, and she is despised by everyone who knows her. To Raskolnikov, she is the perfect symbol of society's corruption and greed. He convinces himself that her death would be justified. Not only would it rid the world of a parasite, but her wealth could also be used to help those in need. But Raskolnikov's motivations are more complex than simple altruism. He is driven by his own dire financial circumstances, his growing detachment from humanity, and an intense need to prove his own superiority. He sees the act as a test of his will, a chance to confirm whether he is truly extraordinary. The decision to commit murder does not come easily. Raskolnikov spends days in a state of feverish agitation, swinging between doubt and determination. He rehearses the crime in his mind, carefully planning every detail, yet he is haunted by the enormity of the act. His thoughts grow increasingly fragmented, his nights sleepless. He avoids human contact, further isolating himself as his obsession deepens. Finally, the day arrives. Raskolnikov, with an axe hidden under his coat, ascends the narrow, dimly lit staircase to Alyona's apartment. His heart pounds with a mixture of fear, resolve, and something he cannot quite name. At that moment, his world teeters on the edge of a decision that will change his life forever. The moment Raskolnikov has prepared for finally arrives. Armed with an axe, he ascends the dark, narrow staircase to Alyona Ivanovna's apartment. His heart races, but his mind is focused on the plan. Knocking on her door, he pretends to bring a valuable pledge for her to appraise. Suspicious at first, Alyona eventually lets him inside. As she turns her back to examine the pledge, Raskolnikov acts swiftly. He raises the axe and strikes her on the head. The old woman collapses, lifeless. In the silence that follows, he stands frozen, staring at her body, overwhelmed by a mixture of horror and adrenaline. But his plan begins to unravel almost immediately. As he searches for Alyona's money and valuables, he hears footsteps approaching. Lizaveta, Alyona's gentle and kind-hearted younger sister, unexpectedly returns. She enters the room and is horrified by the scene before her. Raskolnikov, panicked and acting on instinct, strikes her down as well. The second murder is neither planned nor justified in his mind, leaving him even more shaken. With blood on his hands, Raskolnikov hastily collects a few items and flees the apartment. The city streets seem unfamiliar and threatening, as though the world itself is closing in on him. Every sound, every glance from a passerby feels like an accusation. Reaching his tiny room, he hides the stolen goods under a loose floorboard, unable to bear the sight of them. In the days that follow, Raskolnikov descends into a state of paranoia and physical collapse. He falls into a feverish illness, alternating between delirium and brief moments of clarity. His body weakens, and his mind is consumed by guilt and fear. He becomes hypersensitive to every sound and movement, convinced that someone will uncover his crime. Raskolnikov's rationalizations for the murders begin to crumble. The theory of the extraordinary man, which had once seemed so clear, now feels hollow and inadequate. He cannot reconcile his intellectual arguments with the overwhelming guilt and self-loathing that consume him. Despite his attempts to justify his actions as serving a higher purpose, he is tormented by the faces of his victims, particularly the innocent Lizaveta. His interactions with others become strained and erratic. He avoids his landlady, ignores the letters from his mother and sister, and barely speaks to his one remaining friend, Razumikin. When he does venture outside, the world feels hostile and alien. Every conversation, every glance seems to hint at his secret, and he grows increasingly paranoid. Raskolnikov's isolation deepens as his mental state deteriorates. He is trapped between his belief in his own theory and the inescapable reality of his humanity. The crime, which he had thought would affirm his strength and resolve, has instead exposed his vulnerability and weakness. In this fragile state, Raskolnikov begins to attract the attention of others, including the cunning investigator, Porfiry Petrovich, who seems to see through his facade. The tension between his guilt and the fear of discovery grows unbearable, pulling him deeper into a psychological abyss. As Raskolnikov spirals further into isolation, his encounters with two key figures, Sonya Marmeladov and Porfiry Petrovich, begin to shape his journey in profound ways. Raskolnikov first meets Sonya Marmeladov through her father, Marmeladov, a drunken civil servant. Marmeladov's tragic death, caused by an accident in the street, brings Raskolnikov closer to Sonya and her family. Sonya is a young woman forced into prostitution to support her stepmother, Katerina Ivanovna, and her younger siblings. Despite her suffering, Sonya remains deeply compassionate and morally steadfast, relying on her faith in God to endure her hardships. Sonya's kindness and self-sacrifice create a stark contrast to Raskolnikov's cold rationalism. She represents the moral and spiritual resilience that Raskolnikov lacks. Though she endures the scorn of society, Sonya's quiet dignity and unwavering love for her family leave a profound impression on him. In his troubled state, Raskolnikov begins to confide in Sonya. He sees her as a kindred spirit, someone who understands suffering but refuses to succumb to despair. One night, he invites her to his room and reveals the torment that has consumed him since the murders. Though he does not explicitly confess, Sonya senses the depth of his guilt. She listens without judgment, offering him the hope of redemption through repentance and faith. Sonya's influence grows as Raskolnikov's struggles intensify. Her simple yet unshakable belief in the power of love and forgiveness challenges his hardened worldview. She becomes a guiding light, drawing him closer to the possibility of redemption. While Sonia represents compassion and redemption, Porfiry Petrovich embodies the relentless pursuit of justice. Porfiry is the lead investigator assigned to the murder case. Intelligent and perceptive, he quickly becomes suspicious of Raskolnikov. However, rather than directly accusing him, Porfiry employs a psychological approach, engaging Raskolnikov in conversations designed to unsettle and expose him. Porfiry first meets Raskolnikov at the police station under the guise of casual questioning. He probes Raskolnikov's views on morality and crime, subtly hinting that he sees through his facade. Their interactions are tense, marked by a psychological game of cat and mouse. Porfiry seems to delight in playing with Raskolnikov's nerves, using his sharp wit and understanding of human nature to pressure him. In one pivotal scene, Porfiry surprises Raskolnikov with an unexpected visit. He speaks openly about his investigative methods and the psychology of criminals, all while watching Raskolnikov's reactions closely. Porfiry's calm demeanor contrasts with Raskolnikov's growing agitation, and the tension between them becomes almost unbearable. Despite his cunning, Porfiry does not rush to arrest Raskolnikov. He believes that the weight of guilt will eventually drive him to confess. This calculated patience heightens Raskolnikov's paranoia, leaving him constantly on edge. Through his encounters with Sonia and Porfiry, Raskolnikov is caught between two forces: the possibility of redemption through love and faith, and the inevitability of justice. These relationships push him closer to a decision that will determine his fate. Central to Raskolnikov's inner turmoil is his theory of the extraordinary man, which he uses to justify his actions. He believes that certain individuals possess the right to commit crimes if those acts serve a greater purpose. This belief initially emboldens him to murder Alyona Ivanovna, whom he sees as a parasitic and immoral figure. However, as the story unfolds, the fragility of this justification becomes clear. After the murder, Raskolnikov is haunted by the reality of his crime. The rational arguments that once seemed convincing no longer provide solace. His theory fails to account for the human cost of his actions, particularly the murder of Lizaveta, an innocent woman who posed no threat to him. Her death, unintended and unnecessary, exposes the flaws in his logic. The clash between utilitarian ethics and human compassion is a recurring theme throughout the novel. Raskolnikov's attempt to separate morality from emotion proves impossible. His guilt and inner conflict reveal the limitations of his intellectual approach to ethics. Despite his claims of acting for a higher purpose, his actions leave him isolated and tormented, unable to escape the consequences of his crime. As Raskolnikov grapples with the aftermath of his actions, the role of suffering in his journey becomes increasingly evident. His guilt isolates him from others, and his mental anguish drives him to the brink of despair. Yet, this suffering also begins to awaken a deeper understanding of himself and his place in the world. Sonia Marmeladov plays a pivotal role in this transformation. Despite her own hardships, Sonia embodies selflessness and unwavering faith. Her quiet strength and compassion challenge Raskolnikov to confront the darkness within himself. She urges him to seek redemption through confession and repentance, offering him the hope of spiritual renewal. One of the most significant moments occurs when Sonia reads to Raskolnikov from the Bible, specifically the story of Lazarus being raised from the dead. The passage serves as a metaphor for the possibility of rebirth and redemption, a theme that resonates deeply with Raskolnikov. Though he initially resists Sonia's guidance, her unwavering belief in his capacity for redemption begins to soften his defenses. Raskolnikov's eventual confession marks the beginning of his path to redemption. In surrendering to the authorities, he acknowledges the weight of his guilt and accepts the necessity of punishment. His suffering does not end with his confession. In fact, it intensifies during his time in Siberian exile. Yet through this suffering, he begins to rediscover his humanity and a sense of purpose. Sonia remains a constant presence in his life, visiting him in Siberia and offering unwavering support. Her love and faith serve as a beacon of hope, guiding him toward a deeper understanding of himself and the possibility of salvation. Through her influence, Raskolnikov begins to see that redemption is not found in intellectual theories or grand gestures, but in humility, love, and the willingness to atone for one's actions. Raskolnikov's guilt, like an ever-tightening noose, becomes unbearable. Despite his attempts to justify the murders and suppress his conscience, he is haunted by the memory of his actions and the growing awareness of their moral consequences. His encounters with Sonia Marmeladov deepen his internal conflict. She represents a path toward redemption, but taking it requires him to confront his guilt openly, a step he fears and resists. Porfiri Petrovich's relentless psychological pressure also weighs heavily on Raskolnikov. The investigator does not need physical evidence to see through him. He understands that the guilt will eventually compel Raskolnikov to confess. In one pivotal conversation, Porfiri openly suggests that Raskolnikov should come forward on his own, framing confession as an act that could lead to spiritual relief. The breaking point comes when Sonia urges Raskolnikov to turn himself in. She gives him a small cross as a symbol of repentance, urging him to embrace suffering as the path to redemption. Raskolnikov, though resistant, finally makes his way to the police station. Standing before the authorities, he confesses to the murders of Alyona Ivanovna and Lizaveta. The act of confession is both agonizing and liberating, marking the end of his torment and the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Following his trial, Raskolnikov is sentenced to penal servitude in Siberia. He enters exile with a sense of resignation, still struggling to reconcile his intellectual arrogance with the reality of his actions. Though he has confessed, true redemption eludes him. For months, he remains emotionally distant, detached from his fellow prisoners and the world around him. Sonia follows Raskolnikov to Siberia, sacrificing her own comfort to remain by his side. She visits him regularly, offering quiet support and unwavering faith in his capacity for transformation. Her presence is a constant reminder of the love and forgiveness he has yet to fully accept. Raskolnikov's journey toward redemption is gradual and painful. In the harsh environment of the labor camp, he begins to confront his own humanity. He witnesses the suffering of others, and the shared experience of hardship begins to soften his heart. Slowly, he starts to question the validity of his extraordinary man theory, recognizing the destructive pride that led him to commit his crimes. A turning point comes when Raskolnikov finally accepts Sonia's cross and begins to pray. This simple act symbolizes his willingness to embrace humility and faith, opening the door to spiritual renewal. Though the novel ends with Raskolnikov still in exile, there is a sense of hope for his future. The seeds of transformation have been planted, and he begins to understand that redemption is possible through love, faith, and the acceptance of human frailty. Crime and Punishment remains a timeless exploration of the human condition, grappling with questions of morality, guilt, and redemption that continue to resonate with readers today. Raskolnikov's internal struggle and the consequences of his actions mirror the ethical dilemmas faced in modern society. His attempt to rationalize his crime through the concept of the extraordinary man raises questions about the nature of power, responsibility, and justice. Questions that are as relevant in contemporary debates as they were in Dostoevsky's time. The novel's psychological depth also speaks to the universal experience of guilt and the human capacity for self-reflection. Raskolnikov's journey reveals the destructive power of isolation and pride, as well as the healing potential of love, faith, and connection. For modern readers navigating a world that often feels fragmented and impersonal, Dostoevsky's portrayal of redemption through human relationships and spiritual awakening offers profound insights. Fyodor Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment stands as a cornerstone of world literature, celebrated for its profound exploration of the human psyche and its unflinching examination of moral complexity. Dostoevsky's ability to delve into the darkest corners of the human soul, while illuminating the path toward hope and redemption, ensures the novel's enduring impact. His legacy extends beyond literary achievement. Dostoevsky's works challenge readers to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and society, prompting introspection and empathy. His characters, flawed and deeply human, reflect the struggles and contradictions inherent in all of us. As we close the pages of Crime and Punishment, we are reminded of the enduring relevance of Dostoevsky's message, that even in the face of guilt, suffering, and despair, there lies the possibility of transformation. Through Raskolnikov's journey, we see that redemption is not a single act but a continuous process, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit.